Hey community, how are you? I hope your weekend is filled with family and friends and fun. And we're just going to take a few minutes to talk about a text in the Bible that Jesus is teaching. And just a few thoughts about our life and our world today. I want you to think about what's something that you practice or know that if you practice, you would get really good at. It's a good question because years ago, I would tell my wife, I would watch the Olympics with her, and I said, gosh, I think if I cycled every day, I think I could probably make the Olympics. Or if I swam every day. I even said speed skating. My wife would laugh because she knew I probably didn't have the talent or the skills or the genetics to actually be that good. But in my head, I thought, wow, if I practice these things enough, could I be on that level? Could I be successful? It's funny if you think about the things we say we want to do or practice and never do. I think of things of exercise. I think of things like committing to save money. Things like I want to get better in my education and start to go to school again or learn something new. And a lot of people even say that about faith. They say, gosh, if I only read my Bible, if I only practice some of these things. This takes us right to one of the most famous teachings that Jesus gives. It's really his first message. It's in Matthew chapter 5. And all the way through Matthew 7, Jesus is going to talk about many things. He's going to talk about forgiving people, loving people, being peacekeepers. All of these things, he's in some ways turning upside down the Old Testament and saying, it's not just about getting everything right, but it's actually more than just an intellectual agreement. It's, I want to actually live out the things I'm saying I believe. So Jesus gives a parable, and it's quite fascinating. It's called the wise and foolish builders. And if you hear this story, you're going to get a sense of the scenery we're in right now. We're in a poured foundation. We're in the basement of a new home that will be here in Seymour. But listen to Jesus' words. He says this, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. He says, the rain came and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against that house, and yet it did not fall. It says that because it had had a foundation on the rock. Quite fascinating. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who builds his house on sand. The rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. I just want to talk for a few minutes about this because I think it's so fascinating. First of all, one of the key words you have to look at this, if you want to look at Matthew chapter 7, verse 24, it says, therefore. Anytime you see the word therefore, many of you know this, you want to ask the question, what's it there for? It's for all the previous things Jesus has said from Matthew chapter 5 all the way to that point. He has given tons of instructions about treasures and money and forgiving and oaths and what it means to be married and loving enemies. All these things are what I would say the people of the time, as they gathered on that Sermon on the Mount, on that mountain, families and friends would probably go, oh, I agree with that. That's good. Love your enemy. Oh, that's good, forgiveness. I'm sure they might have had intellectual agreement. But Jesus kind of puts a stamp at the end of this text because he's saying it's not enough to just say you agree with it, believe it. It actually says you've got to practice it. Let's just look at this. It says, everyone who hears the words of mine, Jesus is talking about his own words, and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. I mean, we're in a place that's, we know that in building, you need a concrete foundation. You need something. This is going to be the basement, and it's going to need a sturdy foundation, especially for the rains in Wisconsin and all that'll go on here. And he's saying, what it looks like here, the illustration is when you build your house on the rock, what's he saying? That means you're practicing what you're preaching. One of the most frustrating things for me as a pastor is watching people preach but not practice. One of the most hardest things I think for me to deal with is a person who says all these things that they're so adamant about, but they don't practice it. Think of things like, love your enemy. I'll hear people say, oh, I agree with that, but wait, this one person did this to me, no way will I practice that. Think about being generous with our funds, our time. Well, I want to do that, but to this point. And I think what we say is we agree with a lot of things that Jesus says because they're good things, but do we practice them? It goes on, he says, then the rains came down. What's he talking about that? The rains are the storms of life, because life is going to bring storms. It's going to bring trouble. It's going to bring hardship. And when those things come, and if you don't have practice, if you don't have a solid foundation, you're going to find that those storms are going to undo a lot of your intellectual agreement because you don't have the practice. Think of it this way. As I go to the gym, I try to work out. I have to practice that regularly every week, 3 to 4 times a week. That's important for me so that when tested, when strength is necessary, when endurance is necessary, it's there. Many of you talk about things like, I want to love my enemy, or I want to be more generous, or I want to know more about God. It is the practice. It's the foundation of your faith. It says this, then the rains came down, but that house stood strong because it was on the foundation, on the rock, on the teachings of Jesus. But listen, he says the second half, but everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them in practice is like a foolish man who builds his house on sand. So many people today are building on sand. I wish I had a handful of sand just to say that, because you know in heavy rains and heavy storms, sand washes away. Intellectual agreement will wash away in times of trouble. I don't care how much someone believes something, if they're not practicing it, it is like sand and a wash away. Let me ask you, what are you practicing in your life? What are the principles and the teachings that you've grown up with about Jesus that you're actually putting into practice regularly, daily? Many of you said, I want to be more a deeper, more understanding Christian. I want to be someone who's more patient. I want to be someone who's more loving. That comes with practicing the things of Jesus. Friends, this book is filled with stories of men and women who agreed things and never practiced. And then it's a book filled with people who did the best they could to practice and sustained in times of storm. What do you believe? What are you practicing? Jesus says, if you build your house on the rock, the storms of life will not wash away the truth of what God has in your own life. Friends, this holiday, I hope that you enjoy friends and family, but might you think about and ask each other and talk about, what are you practicing? What are you practicing in the things that Jesus talks about that we should put into our lives? May you become someone who practices and builds your life on a rock, not on sand. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.